Yes, it would. It would be best to get compost that has either not dried out completely, and certainly compost has not been sitting out in the sun.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to go over and look in our pallet area, all our pallets are covered to keep the sun off of them, and for the most part they're stacked up in the shade. I would not expect to get very good life out of a bag of compost that had been sitting on a Walmart parking lot for 2 weeks, because it's been out there and pretty much roasted.
I had some old worm casting that's, I guess, that I found is about 2 years old, right? So that isn't very active.
It's good, but it's not great. You know, there's no such, I don't think there's any such thing as bad worm castings.
Okay.
But if you had fresher, better ones. Also, again, and this is slightly off the subject, but I have used some brands of worm castings and seen absolutely no results whatsoever from them. I found a different company making what he calls black worm castings. The guy is an obnoxious SOB. I can't stand it. But he has a good product. And so, anyway, he's not here. I don't think he's here. Anyway, I tell him to his face, he's just, you know, whatever. But anyway, yeah. But so there is a difference in worm castings to start with. And if you let them dry out, they're not going to be quite as good. But if you want to experiment, and of course, last fall we were just starting to get some moisture. I couldn't grow a garden last year. We weren't allowed to water up in Kendall County. But I found some interesting things. I agreed to take some of his worm castings and use in the small garden that I planted last fall. And I saw some incredible things happen. I planted cauliflower, which of course is not quite as cold hardy as broccoli. And I've got a row of about 30 plants here. I put his worm castings up on the first 8 plants in the row. That 10-degree night came along. Those 8 plants never lost a leaf. Beautiful green. The rest of it, probably 85% of them, froze and died. What it is in there that made them cold hardy, I don't know. I did the same thing on the broccoli. I can't tell the broccoli's any better than any of the others. So there are going to be a lot of experiments going on in my garden this year with the black worm castings. But we do have a few bags of it. If anybody, you know, if you want to buy something and experiment with it, I'll tell you to do so. I can tell you I've seen good results in my garden, but not good enough that we're going to buy 1,000 bags and put it out there and tell you something you really need to do to use.
How much of this black worm casting would you put in your bucket?
Well, we're not going to put it in the bucket. We're going to put it in our thing that holds the compost, and that's what this is for our bucket. And I said we're going to have maybe 1.5 cups material total. I probably would use 1 1/4 cups of just regular compost and maybe 1/4 cup of black worm castings. This is not baking cookies. You don't have to measure things. You know, I do things by the handful or by the feel. This is not an exact science. So a little bit too much, a little bit too little, not really going to have that much effect. But we would really just as soon not have all of that compost wind up in our liquid. So in the case of the big machine out there, it's got a wire-lined basket. We put it in there. In the case of your little bucket, you're going to put your compost down in this bag. And, okay, now let's say this bucket's full of water. And what we're going to do is we want to enhance getting the microbes out of the compost and into the liquid. We do that with air bubbles. Actively flowing air tends to break the bacteria and the fungi loose from the compost and get it out into the liquid. So what we're going to do is to take the smaller, okay, we've got this bigger air stone down here in the bottom of the bucket, and this is keeping our water activated, I mean actively oxygenated. It's bubbling away down there in the bottom of the bucket. We're going to take the smaller stone and we're going to put it down here in the bag of compost and then suspend this down in there, and we're going to leave everything alone for probably about 8 hours. After about 8 hours, we've pretty much gotten all the microbes out of the compost that are going to come out of the compost and into the liquid. So in the case of our big machine, we go over and we just pull the bubbler out, we lift the thing of compost out, set it aside, drop the bubbler back down into the liquid there. In this case, after about 8 hours or so, and that's not exact. It could be 6 hours, it could be 10 hours, it could be 12 hours. It wouldn't really hurt anything if you never took it out, but you'll have a little bit easier to use Compost Tea. So 8-10 hours later, we're going to take this out. We're just going to drop that down in here into the liquid, and then we're going to go take this compost and put it on our garden or somewhere else. But anyway, so that's how we're going to use the compost. Now the other thing that we're going to do early on, when we first put the compost down in here with the bubbler, we're going to put in the kind of things that make these microbes want to reproduce. And today, the real microbiologists are getting so specialized that they're finding very specific things that they can put into the liquid to make one particular kind of microbe reproduce itself over another. This is the kind of thing that Elaine does with her business, is that they will go in and, for instance, there's a very serious fungus disease that kills melons. If you've ever planted or grown melons, if you're a guy growing 500 acres of cantaloupe or whatever, you don't want this particular fungus in there or it will wipe out the root system. You probably lose 2/3 of your crop. They're actually able to make now a specific tea that attacks that one fungus and go out and spray the fields with compost tea. Costs a fraction of using a toxic product and doesn't harm things at all. They're actually making what we would call designer teas that are really made to target one specific problem. We can't do that. We don't have the knowledge or necessarily the fancy brewer. I don't think you really need to do it either. The only thing that you may want to do, there are certain things you can put in that will stimulate fungi over bacteria. There are other things you can put in will stimulate bacteria over fungi. Bacteria tend to loosen your soil, improve your fertilizer utilization, and just be sort of a general stimulant to help plants grow better. Fungi tend to inhibit disease growth and to also help with the breakdown of real woody materials in the soil. So you can do certain things. You can put in stimulants that really enhance fungal growth. You can put in stimulants that really enhance bacterial growth. We tend to just put things in that will sort of create a balance. It will help both things grow a little bit better. Now the first thing that we put in ours, I can't tell you what it is. It's a product we buy. They don't tell us what's in it, but it's simply, they call it compost catalyst, and that's the first thing we put into the water. You may find things like this somewhere, but I don't think they're really necessary. What we tend to do is look at what will make bacteria reproduce without overdoing it. And anything sugary is going to really stimulate bacterial activity. The most sugary, cheap thing that you can put in your compost tea is going to be molasses. But you don't want to overdo it, because molasses, if you put too much in there, I mean, the bacteria start reproducing so fast that it will go anaerobic. In a 5-gallon bucket, I'd put maybe a tablespoonful of molasses. In a big brewer, we might put 3 or 4 tablespoons in there, or less.
Just dump it in the water?
Just dump it in the water. The hotter it is, the less you will want to use of your sugary substance, because the hotter it is, faster the bacteria are going to reproduce, the greater the potential that we'll have for going anaerobic. So sugary things stimulate bacterial activity, and we're going to use them, but we're going to keep the number fairly low. If we want to...
Bond.
Yes?
Dry molasses or liquid molasses?
Either one. Either one will work fine. If you're using liquid molasses, try not to get a highly sulfured product, because sulfur is a natural fungicide. Sulfur kills fungi, both good and bad. So you don't want an extra sulfured molasses. But dry molasses is fine, or just your regular grocery store molasses, or horticultural molasses will be fine. But if it says extra sulfur, or if it says sulfur molasses, which you will see, that's not what you want to be using for your compost tea. Yes, sir.
In the heat of the summer, does it make any difference whether you do it out in the open or do you need to put it in the shade?
I would put it in the shade because, again, you would like your tea to be at approximate air temperature. And if you put it out in the open, it's going to get hotter than air temperature. If you keep it in the shade, it's probably going to stay right around the ambient temperature.
Is there a way to tell whether you're creating anaerobic activity?
You have a built-in anaerobic aerobic tester. It's called your nose. It smells good and earthy and fresh, it's fine. If it stinks, it's gone anaerobic. It's kind of like your compost pile. Compost pile's smelly. You put plastic on it or something and it didn't get enough oxygen.
Well, if it is just becoming anaerobic, I mean, you'll
No, there's no way you'll be able to tell.
Oh, okay.
It pretty much takes, it would take a very sophisticated dissolved oxygen test, and nobody does that. But it can be damaging. We found one company was making compost tea, and when they got through with it, I mean, it had been